I'm Rachel Monroe, 37, founder and CEO of Lumina Tech, a platform I built from late nights, missed holidays, and a belief that brilliance shouldn't require permission. So when my brother Tyler invited me to his wedding, I chose to show up with hope, not pride, hope that maybe, just maybe, we'd be a family that finally saw each other clearly. But that hope unraveled the moment I saw my name, printed in small letters and tucked at a table by the kitchen, while my software powered a $30 million contract with the groom's father. What would you do if your success meant nothing in the eyes of the people who raised you? I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I stood up, and I made sure they could never forget me again. Before we get into the story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever been the underestimated one in your own family, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about what happens when the quiet one finally speaks. Now, let me take you back to the moment it all began. Growing up in Maple Ridge, Oregon, my brother Tyler and I were inseparable. Just 2 years apart, we spent most of our early years building blanket forts in the living room, racing our bikes down Crescent Hill, and catching frogs by the edge of Crystal Lake. Our parents, Frank and Karen Monroe, would pack us identical lunches, label our water bottles in matching Sharpie ink, and beam with pride whenever neighbors commented on how close we were. Back then, everything felt safe, familiar, balanced. Our family vacations to Crystal Lake were a yearly tradition. Dad taught us both how to bait a hook and cast a line, and Mom would take photos of us holding up fish we were too afraid to touch. Tyler would always nudge me with his elbow and whisper jokes while we posed. I was the one who scraped my knees most, who cried when my popsicle fell in the grass. But Tyler never made me feel small for it, not yet. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came quietly, almost invisibly, a series of subtle preferences, small omissions, and gradually redrawn boundaries that, at the time, I told myself were nothing. It started in high school. Tyler joined the football team, following in our father's footsteps as a former Monroe High quarterback. He had the build, the charm, and that easy way of drawing people in. I, on the other hand, gravitated toward the debate team and computer science club. I was the one tinkering with JavaScript, while the Friday night lights roared on the field just a few blocks away. Our parents never missed a single one of Tyler's games, not even in the pouring rain. They were the ones in the bleachers with matching Monroe jerseys, cheering louder than anyone, chatting proudly with other parents about Tyler's potential. Meanwhile, my debate competitions or science fairs were often met with, "Oh no, sweetie, we have that thing with the office," or "We'll try to make it. Text us how it goes." Sometimes, they arrived halfway through my presentations. Other times, they didn't come at all. Business and sports build character. Dad once said as he clapped Tyler on the back after a win, "All that computer stuff. Rachel, it's a hobby. You'll grow out of it." But I didn't. I grew into it. When I was 17, I stayed up late coding a prototype for a school app that helped students track assignments and exam schedules. It ended up being adopted by 3 other high schools in the district. I remember printing out the article when it was mentioned in the local paper and leaving it on the kitchen table, hoping they'd say something. They never did. Tyler got a partial athletic scholarship to Dad's alma mater. I earned a full ride to Stanford at our graduation dinner. The conversation was all about Tyler's fraternity plans, his new campus apartment, and his summer football training schedule. When the waitress congratulated me on Stanford, my mother smiled politely and said, "Yes, Rachel's always been our little computer genius." Then she turned back to Tyler, asking if he'd need a car on campus. That was the first time I realized it wasn't just a phase. I wasn't imagining it. The distance between us had already formed, and I was the only one who noticed. But I said nothing. I kept the peace, smiled through it. I thought maybe one day, when I succeeded enough, they'd finally look up. I had no idea then how far I'd have to go just to be seen. After college, our paths split in ways that couldn't have been clearer. Tyler returned home to Maple Ridge and joined Monroe Developments, the family construction business founded by our grandfather and expanded by our father. He stepped into a management role almost immediately. Despite barely scraping by with a business degree and no real-world experience, his office was waiting. His desk was already labeled. The title Operations Manager was engraved on a brass plate before he'd even unpacked his graduation cords. It's about practical experience, not just grades. Dad said when I asked about it, Tyler understands how things work in the real world. I had no such desk waiting for me. Instead, I moved to San Francisco, sharing a tiny apartment with two other women, working 80-hour weeks at a tech startup while coding late into the night for freelance projects that barely covered rent. I wasn't building a life. I was barely surviving one. But every line of code I wrote, every bug I solved, brought me closer to something of my own. By 28, I was tired of waiting for someone else to hand me a desk. I took the biggest risk of my life. I cashed out my savings, applied for a small business loan, and founded Lumina Tech, a software company focused on solving complex logistics for large-scale operations. I turned my one-bedroom apartment into an office. I pushed the bed into storage and slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. My kitchen became the break room, my dining table, the meeting room. Ramen noodles became breakfast and dinner. Lunch was usually coffee. I coded until my wrists ached, emailed hundreds of potential clients, and itched at meetups where no one remembered my name. Some days, I'd stare at my bank account and wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. Other days, I'd land a client that kept the lights on one more month. When I called home, the conversations were brief. Still doing that tech thing Mom would ask, her voice filled with a mix of concern and detachment. You know, there's always a spot for you at Monroe Developments. You don't have to do all this alone. She said it like an offering, but it felt more like a dismissal. They never once asked about my roadmap, never offered to invest, never said, "We believe in you." Meanwhile, back home, Tyler's promotion to Vice President of Project Development was celebrated with a backyard barbecue, complete with catered food and custom banners that read, "Future of Monroe Developments." My name wasn't mentioned. When I signed Lumina Tech's first five-figure contract, I called my parents to share the news. Mom was too busy prepping side dishes. "That's nice, sweetie," she said. "We're having people over to celebrate Tyler's new role. Can I call you back later?" She never did, but I kept going. Year 2 was worse than the first. I lost my biggest client due to a shift in their leadership team and had to let go of my only employee. For weeks, it was just me again, sleeping less, working more, and wondering what it would take to matter. Then came the breakthrough. I developed a proprietary software system for optimizing supply chains, technology that uses real-time analytics to reduce delays and cut overhead by up to 30%. I called it Nexus 1. At first, no one paid attention, but then, a mid-tier manufacturer gave it a chance. After 2 months, their costs dropped. Then they told another firm, and another. The calls started coming in, and so did emails from people who had once ignored me. It was around that same time that Tyler met Alyssa Warren at a charity golf tournament hosted by Warren Global Properties. Alyssa, beautiful, polished, and daughter of Charles Warren, a real estate mogul with a portfolio spanning the entire country. Their relationship was flashy: private jets, Paris weekends, press coverage in local magazines. Mom couldn't contain her excitement. Charles really likes Tyler. She gushed over one of our increasingly infrequent calls. He's introducing him to the right people. This could open so many doors for the company. She meant Monroe Developments, not mine. The contrast was impossible to ignore. My growing software company, my hard-fought climb from scratch, was still being treated like a hobby. Meanwhile, Tyler's new girlfriend was being praised as the best business opportunity the family had ever seen. And I realized something. No matter how hard I worked or how much I built, I would never be enough to change their definition of success, because in their eyes, success didn't look like a woman alone in a city building software that reshaped industries. Success looked like their son, the former quarterback, shaking hands on a golf course. By the end of year 3, Lumina Tech wasn't just surviving, it was scaling. We moved out of my apartment and into a modest but sunlit office in downtown San Francisco. I hired a small team, 2 engineers, 1 marketing lead, and a part-time operations manager who had more faith in our product than most investors did at the time. We worked long hours fueled by ambition, black coffee, and the quiet belief that we were building something people hadn't realized they needed yet. That belief was confirmed when Monica Reeves, the operations director of Warren Global Properties, reached out after seeing me present at a logistics tech conference. She asked for a demo of Nexus One, and I gave her my best, not knowing that her company, owned by none other than Charles Warren, had no idea I was related to the man dating his daughter. Over the course of 3 months, we conducted performance audits, stress tests, and security reviews. Every meeting was another opportunity to prove what Luminatech was capable of. And we did, eventually. Monica called with the decision, we're in, full-scale integration, $30 million over 3 years. It was the largest deal in our company's short history. More than just a number. It was validation. It meant we weren't a hobby. We were a player. I called my parents that night. It was a Wednesday. Mom answered first. That's great. Rachel, she said, distracted. Did you get the invitation to Tyler and Alyssa's engagement party? It's going to be held at the Warren estate. Charles has his own golf course. A beat of silence. I tried again. It's a $30 million contract. Mom. With Warren Global. Oh, that's a funny coincidence, she said lightly. I'll let your father know. He'll be thrilled for you. But Dad didn't call. Neither did Tyler. Not even a text. I spent the next few days wondering if maybe they didn't understand its magnitude. So at the engagement party, I decided I'd find a quiet moment to tell them in person. Not to brag, just to be seen. The Warren estate looked like something out of a movie, 30 acres of manicured gardens, a Georgian mansion with sprawling wings, and a valet line filled with luxury cars. I showed up with Ethan, who offered his arm as we walked through the stone entrance. You didn't mention this was a billionaire's estate, he whispered. I didn't know. I replied honestly. This is my first time seeing it, too. Inside, everything gleamed. White orchids, champagne towers, and guests in pastel designer suits. The atmosphere practically hummed with wealth and curated elegance. Then, out of nowhere, Charles Warren found me. So, you're the brilliant mind behind Luminatech, he said, extending his hand with a genuine smile. Monica tells me your software will save us millions. My heart skipped. Yes, sir. We're proud to partner with Warren Global. Please, call me Charles, and we'll have to schedule a dinner. I want to hear more about how you see tech shaping this industry. Before I could answer, Mom appeared, breathless and beaming. You two have met, she asked, eyes darting between us. Just now, I said. Charles was kind enough to compliment Luminatech. Your software, Charles repeated. brows lifting slightly. Wait, Monroe. You're Tyler's sister. He never mentioned you were the one running Luminatech. The pause that followed was too long, too loud. Mom gave a light laugh, the kind of people use when they're caught off guard. Oh, Rachel's always been our little computer genius, she said, brushing it off. Tyler's just more aligned with the construction side. Like Frank. Charles's confusion was visible, though he recovered quickly. Well, clearly, genius runs in the family, he said, though his voice was more polite than convinced. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't a coincidence that Tyler hadn't mentioned me. It was a choice. Because of my presence, my achievement, didn't fit the narrative they had curated for him. Tyler, the rising heir of Monroe Developments, was the story. I was just the footnote. Still, I told myself the wedding would be different, that once they saw it, the contract, the conversation with Charles, and the way Ethan looked at me with pride, they'd finally acknowledge me not as the supporting act, but as someone who had built something real. I spent the next 2 weeks finding the right dress, preparing my mind to be part of something that had always made me feel like an outsider. I didn't want a standing ovation, just a seat at the table, a real one this time. The morning of Tyler's wedding arrived with that same soft fog that always hung over Maple Ridge in early spring. I stood by the window of my hotel suite, watching it roll in over the hills, trying to slow my breathing. Ethan adjusted his tie behind me, his reflection calm in the mirror. I had chosen a navy blue dress, classic, tailored, confident. I wanted to be visible, not loud, present, not performative. You look incredible, Ethan said gently. You sure you're ready for this? I'm sure, I replied. I need to be there. I need to see it through. He nodded, but I could still see the hesitation in his eyes. He knew the history. He knew what this day represented. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a test of boundaries, of presence, of whether my family could finally, maybe, make room for me. The night before, I had called Tyler. I don't know what I expected. Maybe warmth, maybe nerves, maybe something real. What I got was rushed indifference. Hey, just wanted to say I'm happy for you, I told him. Looking forward to tomorrow. Thanks, Rach, he replied, distracted. It's chaos here. Alyssa's running the show, and Charles keeps adding guests. I offered to help. He declined. Then there was a pause. Listen, he said, his tone shifting. About the seating chart. There were some last-minute changes, but it's all handled. And that was it. I should have known then, but I pushed it down, the way I always had. Because hope, even when quiet, is persistent, especially when it comes to family. When we arrived at the Warren estate, the atmosphere was almost surreal. Perfect hedges, a quartet playing under a gazebo, guests in pale florals sipping champagne beside cascading fountains. It looked like a lifestyle magazine come to life. A valet opened the door with practiced grace. Welcome to the Warren Monroe wedding, ma'am. As we stepped into the garden, my mother appeared. Her blush pink gown matched the roses climbing the trellises. She kissed my cheek, her eyes lingering on Ethan. And who's this handsome gentleman, Mom? This is Ethan Blackwell. Ethan, my mother, Karen Monroe. They exchanged pleasantries. Her smile was tight, practiced. She barely looked at me before saying, Your father's with Charles and a few of the investors by the bar. Come say hello. She didn't wait for us. Ethan leaned in. She seems warm. Just wait, I said quietly. We crossed the lawn toward the bar. My father stood in a circle of men in tailored suits, laughing at something Charles had just said. When he saw me, his expression stiffened before recovering. "There's my girl," he said, offering a half hug. "And this must be Ethan." Introductions made. Charles greeted me with genuine enthusiasm. "Rachel, the woman of the hour." He beamed. "We're already seeing results from Luminatech's system. You've made quite the impression." The other men looked at me with new interest. One asked if I was the brains behind that Nexus system, the one Charles kept bragging about. Before I could respond, Dad interjected with a chuckle. "Rachel's always had a knack for computers. Tyler actually introduced her to Charles. Didn't you know, always looking out for his little sister?" It was a lie, and everyone at the table knew it. Charles raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. I opened my mouth to correct it, but then Alyssa appeared, floating in a designer gown that sparkled against the afternoon sun. She kissed both my cheeks. "Rachel, you came. And in navy blue. How practical." She scanned my dress with a soft smile. "I thought I mentioned the family was wearing pastels for the photos." "You didn't," I replied. "But congratulations. Everything looks beautiful." She beamed. Daddy spared no expense. Then her eyes drifted to Ethan. And who might this be? Once she learned who he was, her smile widened. "Ethan Blackwell of Horizon Ventures. I've heard of your firm. You simply must join us at the family table tonight." Ethan glanced at me. "Thank you. But I'll be sitting with Rachel." "Of course," she said, smile tightening. "Speaking of which, I should check the seating. We had so many last-minute changes." As she drifted off, Ethan leaned in. "Is it my imagination? Or did it just get 20 degrees colder?" The ceremony itself was pristine, curated to perfection, a string quartet, a celebrity officiant, vows that felt more like marketing copy than anything intimate. Tyler looked handsome but distant. His eyes rarely met Alyssa's. Afterward, guests were ushered into a massive tent for the reception. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Every table was draped in white linens and centered with towering floral displays. It was beautiful. "Let's find our seats," I said, my tone steady, my heart unsure. A wedding planner tapped her tablet as we approached. "Rachel Monroe, +1. Her brow furrowed. "That's odd," she murmured, scrolling. Ethan's hand tightened around mine. "I RSVP'd 2 months ago." I reminded her. "I'm the groom's sister." "Of course. Just give me a moment." She disappeared. Minutes later, she returned with an older woman from catering. "Miss Monroe," the woman said softly. "I'm afraid there's been an oversight. All main reception tables are now full. But we've arranged alternative seating." "What do you mean alternative?" Ethan asked, voice calm but firm. "If you'll follow me." And that's how I found myself, minutes later, being led through a side door, down a quiet hallway, past the sound of laughter and champagne, until we reached the kitchen, where a small table, covered in a rushed white cloth, sat by the industrial freezer. I stared at it in silence. "You can't be serious," I said. And that's when Alyssa appeared in the doorway, glass of champagne in hand, smile sharpened to a knife's edge. "Is there a problem?" she asked sweetly. And I knew this wasn't an oversight. This was a message, and I had finally received it. For a moment, I couldn't move. I stood there, in a designer dress I'd chosen with care, next to a man who admired me not for who I was related to, but for what I had built. and stared at the kitchen table they had prepared like it was a gift. A table too close to the dish racks, too far from the music, just far enough for me to disappear without making a sound. "I do apologize," the catering manager said quietly, avoiding my eyes. There were last-minute changes. We had to prioritize guests with business ties. I opened my mouth to respond, but Alyssa beat me to it. "Daddy's investors needed prime placement," she said with a sip of champagne, her voice sweet but empty. "I'm sure you understand." I met her gaze. "Actually, I don't." She tilted her head, still smiling. "Rachel, this is a wedding. There are always complications. Don't take it personally." Ethan took a step forward, his tone firm. "This is personal. She's the groom's sister, and a major business partner to your father." Alyssa's eyes cooled instantly. The mask slipped just enough to reveal what lay beneath. "Tyler approved the seating chart this morning," she said evenly. "He knew exactly where everyone was placed." The words struck harder than I expected. I could excuse Alyssa's petty cruelty. I could excuse my parents' lifelong preference for Tyler's comfort over my visibility. But this was betrayal. Deliberate. Confirmed. And it broke something I hadn't even realized was still holding on. Ethan looked at me. "We're not sitting here. We're going back to the reception." But I held up my hand. "Give me a moment." He hesitated. "You sure?" I nodded. He squeezed my hand once, then stepped outside the kitchen to wait. I stood there for a few seconds longer, surrounded by the clatter of silver trays and the hum of industrial refrigerators. No one in that kitchen had any idea who I was, or what I'd built, or what had just been taken from me. And maybe that was the most honest reflection of how my family had always seen me. I slipped out of the kitchen and into the nearest hallway. The women's restroom was empty. I locked myself in the far stall, leaned back against the door, and let the tears come. Silently. Bitterly. Not just because of where they'd seated me, but because I had spent my whole life convincing myself it would one day change. I thought of my 16th birthday, the one they forgot because Tyler had a regional playoff. 3 days later, they handed me a grocery store cake and said they were so proud of his performance. I thought of my Stanford graduation, where I delivered the valedictorian speech to a full auditorium, minus my parents, who arrived an hour late because Tyler's fraternity was having an alumni brunch. I remembered signing the lease on Lumina Tech's first real office, calling home to share the news, and being told, "Can we call you back? We're hosting a party to celebrate Tyler's promotion," a title he hadn't earned, a party I wasn't invited to. And now, here I was, the CEO of a company providing $30 million in value to Warren Global, dressed for success, armed with proof, and still, seated behind the ovens. I covered my mouth with one hand to stifle the sound, then wiped my face with the other. The ache in my chest wasn't grief. It was clarity. I had never been invisible. I had been deliberately overlooked. There's a difference. Someone knocked gently on the door. "Rachel." "It's me." I stepped out. Ethan stood there, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. "I figured you might need this," he said softly, offering one to me. I took it and drank. Slowly. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I whispered. He shook his head. "Don't be. It explains a lot. About your strength." We stood there in silence, the hallway cool and quiet. "I came here hoping today might be different," I said finally, "that maybe they'd see me." Ethan turned to me. "You don't need them to see you. You already built something they can't ignore." I looked down at the floor. No, I said quietly. They can ignore it. They have. But I won't anymore. He studied me carefully. What do you want to do? And for once, the answer was clear. I want to stop waiting for permission to be proud of who I am. I want to act like someone who knows her worth. I paused, my voice steady now, and I want to make a business decision. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're not talking about just walking away from the table, are you? I met his gaze. No, I'm talking about making sure they remember exactly who they tried to seat in the kitchen. And I meant it. Every word. I didn't storm back into the reception. I didn't raise my voice or demand attention. That was never my way. But when Ethan and I stepped back into the tent, I was no longer hoping to be noticed. I was no longer seeking a seat that had been denied to me. I was walking in as a woman who knew exactly what she had built, and exactly what it was worth. The music continued. Laughter floated from the tables draped in white linen. No one seemed to notice we had gone, which only confirmed what I had felt all along. They didn't expect me to matter. But I wasn't here to be expected. I was here to be seen. I scanned the tent and found what I was looking for: the head table. Tyler and Alyssa sat alongside Charles Warren and several sharply dressed men I recognized from business coverage. Developers, investors. The type of people you place strategically when you're leveraging a wedding for more than just vows. They're discussing the merger, Ethan murmured beside me. I recognized two of them. That's Thomas Harrington from Coastal Holdings. So that's why the business associates took priority. Charles was using this day to expand his empire, and Tyler was the chosen heir to that growth. It made sense, if you didn't know who had actually built the system making it all possible. Perfect, I said, adjusting my posture. Let's go. We crossed the tent, weaving between guests who offered smiles, compliments, and polite nods. Some congratulated me on the wedding, assuming, perhaps hoping, I was someone else. I responded with grace, but my eyes never left the head table. We reached it just as Charles was mid-pitch. By integrating our commercial assets with Monroe Development's residential capabilities, we streamline everything. Tyler will lead the transition. And with the new logistics platform in place, we anticipate a 20% gain in efficiency within the first year. The man he was speaking to nodded thoughtfully. Tyler looked proud, comfortable, like a man who believed he belonged at that table. He didn't see me until I was standing right beside him. Charles noticed first. His smile faltered just slightly. Rachel, he said. We were just discussing business. Something about software I think you'd find familiar. I smiled, calm and deliberate. Yes, I heard. You were discussing the platform my company created. Tyler's expression shifted. Rachel, now's not really the time. No, I said, holding his gaze. Now is exactly the time. A hush settled around the table. Alyssa glanced nervously toward her father. The other men exchanged quick, uncomfortable looks. There seems to be some confusion. I continued. Lumina Tech is the company that developed the Nexus system. We spent months in negotiation with your operations team. The software you're referring to, the one you just praised, is mine. Charles leaned forward slightly, his voice measured. I wasn't aware you were leading that company. Tyler never mentioned it. I turned to my brother. Why didn't you tell him? Tyler, why didn't you say your sister was the one providing the backbone of his next phase of growth? Tyler opened his mouth, then closed it again. It didn't seem relevant at the time. I let the silence speak before I answered. It's relevant now. Alyssa stood abruptly. You're making a scene at our wedding. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. No, I'm making a decision. I dialed. Gregory. It's Rachel Monroe. Terminate the contract with Warren Global. Effective immediately. Gasps. Eyes widened. Tyler turned pale. Charles stood. Rachel. This is absurd. I raised a hand. Calm and unwavering. It's not a negotiation. The decision is final. Alyssa's composure cracked. You can't do that. Daddy just finished implementing your system across all his properties. I can, and I have. I said, Luminatech doesn't do business with people who don't respect its leadership. Charles tried again. You're walking away from $30 million over a seating chart. I looked him in the eye. I'm walking away from a partnership that treats the woman who built the product like she doesn't belong in the room. Tyler stepped toward me. You've ruined everything. Richard's pulling out of the deal. You've just destroyed our biggest opportunity. I turned to him, my voice even. No, Tyler, I didn't ruin anything. You did. When you decided I was worth less than your story. When you let them seat me in the kitchen. Alyssa was trembling now, her perfect world unraveling thread by thread. Charles nodded slowly. My legal team will be in touch. But for what it's worth, I admire your principles. Then you understand why I won't compromise them. I replied. I tucked my phone back into my clutch, turned to Ethan, and said only one word. Let's go. And just like that, I walked out of the tent, not with anger, not with vengeance, with clarity and power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking to be let in. I was walking away on my own terms. The sun was just beginning to dip beyond the hills as we stepped out of the reception tent. The air had changed, cooler, quieter, as if the estate itself had gone still, waiting to see what would happen next. We hadn't even reached the valet when my phone began to ring. Once, twice, then again, different numbers, different names. I silenced it without looking. I didn't need to see who it was. I already knew. The wedding, the performance, the facade, the deals stitched behind closed doors, was unraveling. Not because of me, but because of the choices they had made long before I ever showed up in a navy blue dress and asked for nothing more than a seat. The valet pulled up with my Tesla, his eyes widening slightly as he handed over the keys. Nice car, he said. Thanks, I replied, tipping him generously. It's amazing what you can afford when you build something of your own. Ethan chuckled as he slid into the passenger seat, feeling a little petty. Are we? I smiled faintly. Just a touch. But before I could pull away, I saw him, my father, striding across the gravel in dress shoes that weren't meant for speed. His face flushed, eyes locked on my car. Rachel, stop right there. I sighed, rolled down the window, and kept the engine running. Yes, Dad. He reached the driver's side, winded and red with fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? Do you have any idea what kind of damage you've just caused? To whom I asked? To Charles? To Tyler? He pointed toward the house. Richard Bradford is furious. He's talking about pulling out of every project with Monroe Developments. Your mother is in tears. Your brother is devastated. All because you couldn't handle a seating mistake with some grace. I laughed. Not loud, not cruel, just softly. The kind of laugh that comes from someone finally done playing the part. It wasn't a mistake. Dad, it was intentional. And you know it. So what? You sit where they put you. That's what people do when they're guests at someone else's wedding. Ethan leaned forward. Sir, with all due respect, your daughter is the CEO of the company that Richard Bradford sought out. Because of its excellence. Not because of family ties. What she received today wasn't a misstep. It was an insult. My father turned to him sharply. And who are you to tell me how to raise my daughter? I stepped in, voice calm but resolute. This is Ethan Blackwell. He's with me, and he's right. What happened today isn't about pride, it's about respect, something I've never truly received from this family. You want respect, Dad snapped. You just canceled a $30 million contract with your brother's father-in-law. Do you even understand what you've done to Tyler's career? And there it was, the real concern, the real allegiance, not to fairness, not to professionalism, but to the legacy they always imagined for Tyler, the one I was never allowed to touch. I'm sorry that my decision impacts his opportunity, I said, not sounding sorry at all. But I'm not sorry for protecting my company or myself. You need to fix this, he insisted. Call them. Tell them it was emotion, that you weren't thinking clearly. I met his eyes. I've never been clearer. He started to speak again. But then, my mother appeared behind him. Her eyes were red, makeup smudged, expression pleading. Rachel, please. Tyler's hurting. This family's hurting. Don't you see what you're doing to us? What I'm doing, I asked. Stunned. You think I caused this? She took a step forward. We've always been proud of you. No, I said, not letting her finish. You've tolerated me. You've dismissed me. But proud. Tell me one time you celebrated my success the way you celebrated every one of Tyler's promotions. She didn't answer. And that silence said everything. Behind them, a small crowd had gathered, guests watching the scene unfold like it was part of the evening's entertainment. Among them, I saw Naomi, my cousin, the only one who had ever quietly cheered for me. She caught my eye and gave me a discreet thumbs up. I looked back at my parents. I think this conversation is over. You're choosing business over family, Dad asked coldly. No, I said. I'm choosing dignity over favoritism. There's a difference. And before he could respond, another voice cut through the air. Rachel. It was Tyler, jacket undone, tie loose, eyes wild. You ruined everything. He marched toward the car. Alyssa trailed behind him, no longer glowing, no longer composed. Charles is pulling out. Monroe Developments is collapsing. Do you even care? I opened the door, calm as ever. I care about building things that last. And I care about not being treated like a footnote in my own story. Fix it, he snapped. You owe me. I looked at him. My brother, the one I used to build blanket forts with, the one who let them seat me behind the ovens. I don't owe you anything. Then I pulled away. From the wedding. From the weight. From the years I spent shrinking to fit someone else's legacy. I wasn't burning bridges. I was finally crossing the one I built myself. The next morning, I arrived at Luminatech's office before sunrise. The city outside hadn't fully woken up, but I had. Not just from sleep, but from a years-long trance of waiting. Waiting for approval. Waiting for recognition. Waiting to be seen by people who had no intention of truly looking. My assistant Jenna was already at her desk when I walked in. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held a quiet intensity. You've got 17 emails from Warren Global executives, she said without looking up. 3 from Monica Reeves. Richard Bradford called twice already. He says it's urgent. I nodded slowly. Schedule a call with Monica for 10. As for Charles Bradford, tell him I'm in meetings all day. I can speak with him tomorrow. Jenna blinked. Tomorrow? He sounded like he expected to talk to you now. I'm sure he did, I said calmly. But I don't rush for people who didn't think I deserved a seat. I hadn't even settled into my chair when Daniel Curtis, our COO, appeared in the doorway with a look that was half concern, half curiosity. So, he began, leaning on the frame. Want to tell me what exactly happened at your brother's wedding that led to us canceling the largest contract in our company's history? I motioned for him to come in and close the door. Then, quietly and plainly, I told him everything. The kitchen seating, the lie Tyler told in front of the investors, the way Alyssa looked at me like I was staff, the silence from my parents, and the phone call I made, standing at the head table, in front of everyone who had never once believed I belonged. When I finished, Daniel sat back in his chair, silent for a moment. Then he said, I'd like to say I'm surprised, but knowing how your family has treated you over the years, this tracks. I exhaled, the tension slowly unwinding from my shoulders. The question now is how we move forward. Bradford represented 22% of our projected revenue this year. We need to make up that shortfall. Daniel leaned forward. I've already started. Remember that demo we did for Westfield Partners last month? They've been on the fence, but I think with a few adjustments, we could close that deal. Also, we've had growing interest in our European expansion. We can reallocate the implementation team. Make it happen, I said. And let's bring in legal to formalize our exit from the Bradford contract. I want everything clean, professional, but final. Just as Daniel stood to leave, Jenna's voice came over the intercom. Rachel, Thomas Harrington from Coastal Holdings is on line 1. He says it's regarding a potential contract. I looked at Daniel. He raised an eyebrow. The Thomas Harrington from the wedding stay, I said, pressing the speaker button. Mr. Harrington, this is Rachel Monroe. Miss Monroe, came the smooth voice through the phone. Thank you for taking my call. I hope I'm not interrupting your morning. Not at all, I replied. What can I do for you? Well, he said, after our brief conversation at your brother's wedding, I took the liberty of researching Luminatech more thoroughly. And I must say, I'm impressed. Your Nexus platform is precisely the solution Coastal Holdings has been seeking. I'd like to arrange a demonstration. I'd be happy to, I said. We can coordinate schedules through my assistant. One more thing, he added, his tone shifting slightly. We've been in early talks with Warren Global about a potential partnership, but after witnessing Saturday's events, I'm reevaluating whether they're the kind of company we want to be aligned with. Daniel's eyes widened, but I kept my voice steady. I can't comment on another company's culture, Mr. Harrington, but I can assure you that at Luminatech, we believe in leading with integrity and respect. That was clear, he said. I'll have my office follow up. The call ended. Daniel stared at me. You just walked out of a $30 million deal and somehow landed the other biggest player in the room. I gave a small smile. Sometimes walking away sends the loudest message. By noon, 3 more inquiries had come in from firms I barely knew were watching. At 2, I spoke with Monica Reeves. She sounded exhausted. She apologized for what happened, told me the replacement system was already 3 weeks behind, asked, almost begged, if there was anything that could be done to repair the partnership. I told her the truth. This isn't about money. It's about value, and not just of the software. Monica, of the person who created it. She was quiet. Then she said, I understand. For what it's worth, I think they made a mistake. They did. I said, but I won't. That evening, I stood at my window as the city lit up beneath me, not from spite, not from ego, but from peace. I had made a choice that morning, not just to protect my company, but to protect the woman who had built it from nothing. I didn't need their approval. I had something better: self-respect. And that, finally, was more than enough. The text came at 3:17 p.m., just as I was reviewing the updated international rollout timeline. Unknown number. 4 words. Rachel. It's Aunt Linda. I froze. Linda Monroe, my father's sister. Hadn't spoken to our family in over 20 years. She was never at holidays. Never mentioned. I was 6 the last time I remembered seeing her. And even then, I sensed something unspoken hanging in the air whenever her name came up. Over time, she became a ghost, erased without explanation. I stared at the message, then slowly typed back, "Hi, how did you get my number?" Her reply came instantly. "I have my ways, and I've been watching." Quietly. "You did something very brave. Rachel, I'd like to talk, woman to woman, if you're willing." I agreed to meet her for coffee the next day. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe a curious family spectator. Maybe someone who just wanted to say, "I told you so." But what I got was something else entirely. Aunt Linda looked nothing like the family photos I vaguely remembered. She was sharper now, confident, gray at the temples but elegant, the kind of presence that filled a room without asking permission. "I've followed Luminatech for over a year," she said, stirring her tea. "Didn't even realize you were that Monroe until the article about the Warren contract hit the business wire." I smiled cautiously. "That's usually when people start paying attention." Linda leaned in. "I know what happened at the wedding. Word travels fast in those circles. But that's not why I'm here." "Then why I asked?" She took a deep breath. "Because I know what it feels like to be erased." I said nothing. She continued. "Back in the 80s, I worked at Monroe Developments, just like your father. I was there when it was still one office and 2 trucks. I helped build it. I handled client portfolios, site planning, payroll. But when it came time for succession, your grandfather handed everything to Frank. Said, 'Construction's no place for a woman. Interior design's more your speed.'" I felt something twist in my chest. "I left. Started my own firm," she said. "Made it successful. But not a single Monroe ever acknowledged it. They called it a side gig at Christmas, like it was a craft project. I never had children. I had work. And I had to decide whether I wanted to spend my life proving I was enough or just be enough without their permission." I swallowed hard. "It never stopped hurting," she said gently. "But it stopped defining me. And seeing what you did at that wedding, that was the first time I saw someone in our family do more than walk away. You stood up, and you stood tall. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath. Linda, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," she said. "They made sure you wouldn't." We talked for nearly an hour. She filled in the gaps. How the Monroe men had always preserved their version of the story. How women were expected to support quietly, applaud loudly, and never outshine. How the moment someone refused, they became an inconvenience, a problem, a name never spoken. Her words didn't just explain the past, they reframed it. My story wasn't new, it was inherited. I drove home that evening in a strange, quiet awe, not just of Linda, but of the resilience threaded through women who had come before me. Women who paved roads with no signs and no thanks. And now, here I was, not just building my own company, but stepping fully into a legacy they tried to deny me. Later that night, Ethan came over with takeout, and that easy calm I'd come to love. "How was coffee with the mystery aunt?" he asked as we sat on the floor, the city glittering through the windows behind us. "Revelatory," I said, and told him everything. When I finished, he sat in silence for a moment, then said, "You didn't just break away from your family's story, Rachel. You rewrote it." I let that sit, because for the first time, it didn't feel like I was fighting for a place at their table. I was building a better one where no one had to beg to be seen, one where brilliance wasn't filtered through gender or tradition, one where the next woman wouldn't have to burn herself down to prove she belonged. And I knew, deep in my bones, I wasn't just walking away from old wounds. I was closing the door on a pattern that had needed breaking for generations. The week after my meeting with Aunt Linda moved like shifting ground beneath steady feet. Quiet, controlled, but full of tremors beneath the surface. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was leading. At Lumina Tech, we hit a stride. Thomas Harrington's team from Coastal Holdings was quick to schedule a formal demonstration. Apex Ventures followed with interest not just in our software, but in a potential strategic investment. Jenna could barely keep up with the influx of inquiries. Not out of chaos, but momentum. Then came the unexpected. Bradford Enterprises, through Monica Reeves, requested a new meeting. Not to repair the old contract, not to negotiate damage control, but to propose something entirely different. "We're prepared to offer a new contract," Monica said over the phone. "New terms, full transparency. Richard is even willing to issue a formal written apology, acknowledging how unprofessionally you were treated." I paused. "And Tyler?" I asked. Alyssa. Monica hesitated. "Alyssa's no longer involved in company business. There's tension. Charles made it clear she's to remain outside any professional matters moving forward." And Tyler, I didn't ask again. I didn't need to. I told her I'd consider it and hung up. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because for the first time, I had the power of not needing to reply immediately. And that was power I'd earned. Later that week, I sat with Ethan on the balcony, a glass of wine in hand, watching the sky deepen from lavender to indigo. "So," he said, his voice gentle, "are you going to take them back?" I swirled my wine. "Maybe, if it truly serves Luminatech. Not out of pride, not out of fear, but from strength." He nodded. "That sounds like the woman I met, and the CEO I admire." I smiled, because somewhere along the way, those two versions of me, the woman and the leader, had become the same person. The next day, Jenna buzzed into my office. "Rachel, there's someone in the lobby asking to speak with you. No appointment. Says it's personal. Named Tyler Monroe." I stared at the phone. My brother hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't said a word since the wedding, unless you counted that night in the driveway, where fury had clouded any possibility of clarity. I told Jenna to send him in. When Tyler walked through the glass doors of my office, he looked different, less polished, like someone who had learned that no suit could fix a fractured truth. "Thanks for seeing me," he said quietly. I gestured toward the chair. "Talk." He sat, hands clasped, shoulders drawn in. "I messed up," he said. "Not just the seating chart, not just what I didn't say, but everything. For years, I said nothing. I've spent so long trying to be the version of myself they needed me to be, the one they'd bet on, the one who carried the Monroe name the right way. And when you started succeeding, really succeeding, it scared me, because I didn't know where that left me." I breathed slowly, listening. "So I kept you small," he admitted. "I didn't tell Charles about you. I didn't correct Dad when he lied. I let them seat you in the kitchen because it was easier to pretend your success didn't exist than to admit it outshined mine. The room fell quiet. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. Just the chance to tell the truth. I sat back, not coldly, but clearly. You were my brother, Tyler, my friend, before any of this, and you knew they overlooked me for years, and you did nothing. I know, he said. I let fear speak louder than loyalty, and now I asked. Now, he said, I want to do better, be better, and not just for appearances, for real. I looked at him, not the brother I grew up with, not the man at the head table, but someone in between, someone learning. We're not fixed, I said quietly. This doesn't erase anything, but it's a start. He nodded. That's all I can ask. We stood. He offered a handshake. I gave a small, cautious hug. Later that day, I called Monica, not to say yes, but to say this: if Lumina Tech returns to Bradford, it will be under our terms, with protections, with transparency, and with the understanding that this isn't a reset, it's a new beginning. Earned, not assumed. And she agreed. Because the version of me who walked away from that wedding wasn't coming back to be accepted. She was coming back to be respected. And this time, on her own terms. In the weeks that followed, things shifted, not dramatically, but deeply, quietly, like tectonic plates. Real change often begins beneath the surface. The new Bradford contract was signed, not a reattachment to the past, but a forward-facing agreement. Every term had been reviewed, every clause tightened. The apology, printed on official letterhead, had arrived with Richard Bradford's signature at the bottom. He called it a rare admission. I called it a beginning. But even as business steadied, something in me stayed restless, not from doubt, from recognition. Because if I had gone through all of that, the erasure, the dismissal, the slow-burning grief of being unseen, then I knew others had too. Women just like me, who had vision, who had talent, who had been taught to stay quiet, play nice, ask later, and I couldn't unsee them now. So I created Visible. It wasn't flashy, just a pilot program, 20 women in tech, all from different backgrounds. Some were the first in their families to go to college. Some were raising kids while pitching investors. Others had ideas still scribbled in notebooks because no one had told them those ideas were worth anything. We met on Wednesday evenings, virtual at first, then in person, and what began as business mentorship slowly became something else. A space where we could say things out loud that we'd spent years swallowing. My brother got the family loan. I got a warning not to aim too high. My husband's friends still ask if I help out with my company. They only listen when I bring a male co-founder into the room. One night, one of them, a woman named Liana, barely 30, building a healthcare tech platform out of her garage, asked me, Rachel, how did you know when it was time to stop asking for permission? I paused. Then I said, when I realized their silence wasn't confusion, it was comfort, because as long as I stayed small, they didn't have to adjust. The chat went quiet. Then slowly, one by one, nods appeared on screen, tears, and the beginning of a new kind of courage, because that's the truth no one tells you. That most of the time, the permission you think you're waiting for, no one's planning to give it. You have to take it. You have to decide you're worthy. You have to decide the kitchen chair isn't your place, even if it's where they've always put you. And then, you build your own table. Not to sit alone, but to make room for others. That was what visible became. A table I never had, but always needed. One I could finally offer to others, without apology or compromise. And outside of that space, things changed, too. My mother called, not to ask for anything, just to talk. "I've been thinking about what you said," she admitted. "About the way we showed up for Tyler. And not for you." I stayed quiet. Let her speak. I didn't want it to be true. But it is. I don't know how to fix all of it. But I want to try. It wasn't perfect. But it was honest. Tyler, too, kept showing up. Not with grand gestures, but with small consistencies. He asked questions about Luminatech. He listened more than he spoke. And when he made a comment in a meeting that echoed something I'd said 2 weeks earlier, he paused mid-sentence and gave me credit. That mattered. Ethan and I deepened. Quietly. Intentionally. He never asked me to shrink. Never told me to soften. He just stood beside me, not as a shield, but as a witness. And there's power in that, too. But the most important change was internal. I no longer checked their faces for pride. I no longer measured my milestones by their reactions. I had become my own mirror. And finally, I liked what I saw. Not just a founder, not just a sister or daughter or someone's plus one, but a woman who had refused to disappear, and in doing so, had reminded others they didn't have to either. It's strange how life softens when you stop forcing it to explain itself. When you stop begging certain people to see you. When you stop waiting for moments to be handed to you. And instead, you make them. 6 months after the wedding, Luminatech hosted its first annual summit. It wasn't extravagant, but it was intentional. A space designed not just to showcase innovation, but to honor the minds behind it. Diverse, brilliant, often overlooked. Not anymore. I stood at the podium, looking out at a room filled with leaders who reminded me of the woman I used to be. The one sitting behind an oven, not because she lacked power, but because others refused to acknowledge it. I thought about all the tables I'd been denied, the meetings I'd been left out of, the applause I never got. And yet, somehow, I had built something they couldn't ignore. Because the truth is, recognition is fleeting. But legacy, the kind that comes from building something that outlives you, that's earned, after the summit. I walked back to my office. Jenna had left a bouquet on my desk. White tulips. A quiet note was tucked between the stems. "Thank you for showing us that quiet doesn't mean weak, that speaking with calm doesn't mean you lack fire, that building your own path isn't a last resort, it's a declaration." I held that note for a long time. Later that evening, I got a text from Aunt Linda. No preamble, just this: "They erased us. You rewrote us." I smiled. Not because I needed her validation, but because it meant the line was no longer broken. It was connected, whole. There are moments you don't forget, not because they're loud, but because they are final. The moment I chose not to sit at a table that didn't honor me. The moment I picked up the phone and canceled a $30 million deal, not out of revenge, but out of principle. The moment I stopped asking to belong and started building something that couldn't be taken away. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like the forgotten one, the underestimated one, I hope you remember this. You don't need their invitation. You need your own blueprint. You don't have to fight your way into rooms that weren't made for you. You can build your own. And when you do, leave the door open. There's always someone behind you, wondering if they're allowed to be more. Be the proof that they are. And that's how I stopped asking for a seat at their table and built one of my own. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below. Have you ever had to choose yourself over family approval? Don't forget to like. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your voice, your value, and your power.